Welcome. My name's Christy Bolingbroke. I'm the Executive Artistic Director with the National Center for Choreography here at the University of Akron. NCCAkron has embarked on a series of dancing conversations, and these really started as a means to take dance outside of the studio. I happen to believe that dance is a way of processing the world in which we live in, so why wouldn't we invite other people who operate in the world who don't specialize in dance to be in dialogue with us about what they notice and what they see? Tonight's conversation is meant to be in the spirit of discovery, a means to continue to ask questions, not only seeking answers, but a way of making sense and continuing to think about how we still don't know everything. Also conjoining tonight is our Satellite Residency program. And this is something that we started during COVID when we couldn't bring artists to Akron, where we decided to say, how could we still support artists with where they're at? What I particularly love about this, not only supporting artists firsthand, but is the very idea of a satellite residency. The definition of satellite, and I'm paraphrasing here, but has a sense of some sort of body circling and collecting information and reporting it back to another body. And I love that idea as a constellation of artists out there who are doing their work, continuing their research, and then coming back together and sharing that information with us here in Akron. And so with that in mind, we had the opportunity to support Liz Lerman in her work. Liz is someone that you maybe have heard of before as a choreographer, an interdisciplinary artist, and the recipient of honors including a 2002 MacArthur Genius Grant and the 2017 Jacob's Pillow Dance Award. Key to her artistry is opening her process to various publics, resulting in research and outcomes that are participatory, urgent, and usable. She founded Dance Exchange in 1976 and cultivated the company's unique multi-generational ensemble into a leading force in contemporary dance until 2011. Her most recent work, Healing Wars, toured across the U.S. in 2014-15. Lerman teaches critical response, process, creative research, the intersection of art and science, and the building of narrative within dance at institutions such as Harvard University, Yale School of Drama, and Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Her third book is Hiking the Horizontal, Field Notes from a Choreographer, and as of 2016, she is an institute professor at Arizona State University. Please join me in welcoming Liz Lerman.
Hi, Christy.
Hi, Liz. So glad that we could make this happen. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, the thanks is all towards you, your team, all the great people you've assembled. It's really meant a lot to us to be able to have the residency, and just thank you.
And I want to start off right away we titled it Women in Witchcraft. I love alliteration. It's pithy. It was tight. I know that there's so much more involved in this, but I want to invite you to share why witches? What initially inspired your work on Wicked Bodies, which had been the piece that you had been developing at the outset of COVID?
Yeah, well, first of all, I also want to say the idea of dancing conversations is so powerful because for me, bodies and intellect have gone together forever. And why we ever separated them for any reason seems entirely perilous to our society. So I'm just delighted to be in the midst of the notion. And then you add that satellite image and it's pretty great. I've been thinking about bodies, female bodies and older bodies since my mother's death in the 70s. That's always been a part of my work. But I was actually on tour in Edinburgh, went to a museum. The Edinburgh Museum had an exhibit called Wicked Bodies, and it was 500 years of drawings of witches. And when I walked in, I'm so interested in witches, but by the time I walked out, I was like crazed. I was enraged. I was laughing. I was furious. I couldn't believe it. Because it's true that these pictures were predominantly about West and Northern European ideas of witchcraft and of women, but you couldn't believe, or maybe you could, what was going on in most of these drawings. at one point during my walkthrough, I thought to myself, boy, if I just bring these to the stage, it'll be the most pornographic work I ever make. Because what people were doing, mostly male artists, were doing to women's bodies was both craven and crazy and weaponizing, but there still was this little bit of slyness inside the women, and I sort of felt empowered actually by the time I came. So I had this notion that goes along with what you said in the introduction. I don't know a lot about this. I'm going to go find out. And thus began quite a bit of research and an incredible unearthing of information and ideas, because every culture has its witches and every time frame has had its witches. And there's a lot you can look into.
Mm-hmm. And so at the outset of COVID, I was very fortunate to see a run through of Wicked Bodies, not in its entirety, but in some very fully realized sections on stage there in Arizona. And you have revisited some of that research and material as we shifted into a satellite modality of thinking. So what have you discovered along the way?
Well, among the things that I got interested in, I think maybe one of the driving forces was this question of what knowledge gets celebrated, what knowledge gets erased, and what knowledge gets criminalized. And that became, again, kind of an engine for the early part of the research. And I began to focus on the kind of incredible knowledge systems that predominantly women have, but it isn't only women, but I was sort of focusing there. And went through this period of thinking, I think when you saw the piece, that we had a collector, a male collector, he's collecting witches, he wants their knowledge, he's trying to save the world with the knowledge that the witches have, with the idea that witches had survived previous extinctions. That's what brought this knowledge up. And to some extent, both for real and metaphoric, I think that. Knowledge born out of not just suffering, but out of challenge, out of being warriors, out of being, survivors, and what has been passed on generation to generation. And that took me I was quite interested in that, and interested in the question of where witches come from. For example, stepmothers. In a lot of Western lore, it's a stepmother first before a witch. And so we got into some of those stereotypes. Later, I got into questions of ritual practice as a practicing artist, and of course, completely committed to creative practice is something everybody can have. I'm interested in how much of witches' work in some societies had been practices, whether it was healing practices, legal practices, supporting practices, and in contemporary stories that I heard from people who would quote, go visit the woman around the corner. You're getting practices of some kind. So that's the second section, was about those rituals. And then, I kept for the whole time thinking about, at some point, we're going to have to address the witch trials, the witch hunts, the murder and genocide of hundreds, well, we don't know how many thousands of women over a period of a couple of centuries, and what possibly could be going on, that mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts would be killed so brutally as they were legally. And I just want to repeat this because that's part of what we're going to be seeing today is, it was legal. The church may have riled people up, but the state was doing the killing.
Wow.
And that got me interested. And there's much more to be said, but that was a part of it.
The idea of information that's celebrated, erased, and criminalized, and also where that information then is sort of lived or placed on women, who maybe don't represent the conformed norms or expectations of the day, and this idea too of where witches come from, which was one of my questions, was like, are people choosing or declaring themselves as witches as a religious practice, or does society call people a witch because they are non-conforming to social conditioning in some way? And I don't know that it's an either or question, but I'm curious what your research and opinions may be on the subject.
Well, you're right. I move along that spectrum, and I think there are reasons for why all of that would be true. One is lineage. the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, and how that knowledge is transformed by each generation. It's kind of a beautiful thing. And under certain conditions, that is kept secret. We now certainly live in a time where people are keeping something secret out of security for their own communities. It's not worth making it public, and don't, because it will be misused or abused or appropriated. So, there is that kind of lineage thing, and it's, I think, quite beautiful. And then there's the use of the term to call anything. I don't even like the word norm and abnormal, because it doesn't serve. It's really about power. And in the case of certainly a lot of the witch trials, we're dealing with a lot of issues around sexuality, the devil. I mean, it's hard to get into how seriously people consider the devil as a creature, and how much was linked to women's sexuality and only women in relationship to the devil, and what that meant, which was time-consuming, took up a lot of issues. But it wasn't only that. Neighbors calling out neighbors. Somebody gets sick. Oh, it's a witch, and then leading to, again, horrible endings. So we see it. We see it around us, and I think that was part of what also kept us going, the whole group, even through COVID and through the way we've had to come together and be apart and work, of course, virtually. It feels very relevant, just right up to this moment. I myself, now that I'm teaching at a university, it's interesting to me how universities rank knowledge systems. And I'll just say that if they rank knowledge systems by how much research dollars you bring in, then a knowledge system that involves the body, creativity, is ephemeral, deals entirely with connectedness and how we want to relate to each other, as dance does, it's not going to be high up in the ranking system. And so again, the dismissiveness of deep knowledge is really distressing to me. And so the witches, turned out it's really good to go through a pandemic with witches around you. It's one of the best things. I encourage everybody.
Something. And that makes sense too, because, since we've started our conversations, I have been more hyper aware of, even when it's not necessarily overt, but the spirit of witches, or even we talk about, magic and harnessing or finding your own power within. That in many regards is what witches were being criminalized for, and to say that they were not, because they're exerting their own power or feeling empowered or not bending to someone else's will, or, a husband likely in a lot of different social forms and constraints. And so it's fascinating how both witchcraft, witches, proclaiming someone as a witch can be empowering for the individual to harness, to find their own voice, to be able to control their own emotions and use them for good in a way, or a way that serves them. But it can also be a slur in many other regards for what someone else would be able to consider a put down on a woman or person who is following their own path with that regard. And I don't know that there's a major in, really finding your own voice and following your own path in higher education. And so when you talk about the hierarchy of knowledge systems, that certainly is a part of it, that of course it's at the intersection of art and science and these different realities. And I know one of them too, that's featured in one of the films we're going to see later, specifically speaks to Johannes Kepler as an astrologist and mathematician, and his mother, who was on trial for being a witch. But you're going to actually tee up our first film entitled Justice, which is about a different trial.
Yeah. And I'll just say, as we leave the knowledge systems, the thing that kind of delights me about Kepler is that he is such a bridge character, and he did go save his mother, took him. But I have in my imagination that, part of his capacity to see the planets move the way he did is because of the story she told him. This is this idea that, science is magical, really, and why not? Why not? So yes, I decided that there would be one place in our project where we would really take a look at the actual trials, and this is one of the sections we're going to be showing now. I took an interest in the witch Agnes Sampson, who was a revered elder in her community and a healer, and in King James VI, also James I. You may know him as the person who translated the King James Bible. You have to understand that Bible's in every hotel room. That's the same King James who oversees this trial and is at the heart of the death of a fair number of witches before he reforms. He does go through a slight reformation when he becomes King of England, and there's a little bit of a shift. But this particular piece looks at that, and I'll just say that the writing that you're going to hear throughout the pieces is something that we collaborate on together in making. And some of this most beautiful writing comes from Leah Cox here, who had written a spell for leaving the body. And then later you get a spell for forgiveness. And I know we'll talk about the spells for everybody, but writing spells just as a kind of creative form turned out to be a great release for all of us in our work. Some of it, as what you're going to see first, is kind of devastating and difficult, but some of it is also quite poetic, I hope. I hope people will find that to be true.
So much. Thank you so much for sharing these films with us. And also you hinted we have a little prompt, a little invitation for our viewing audience later on too. But I really appreciate getting to be a part of your process, Liz. And absolutely. With that said, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Justice.
We are the witches of justice. You see us with brooms. That is because we are always cleaning up. You see us with animals. That is because we seek the wisdom of other living creatures for understanding governance. You see us with potions and lotions. That is because our skin is worn from trying.
The North Berwick witch trials held in Scotland in 1590 were concerned with a massive plot against King James VI, also known as the translator of the King James Bible. It was alleged that over 200 witches gathered. Presided over by the devil himself to use weather magic to plot against the king and his new bride. James decided to attend the Berwick witch trials in person, which was unusual for a monarch.
This is the trial. Session 1. Tell the truth concerning the things which would be asked. As much for the trial as for the unburdening of your conscience, without subterfuge or craft, and swear on the Holy Gospels to tell the truth. Take the oath to tell the truth concerning all that would be asked, of the crimes and evils of which you are accused. Swear to tell the absolute truth concerning everything that would be asked. When the voice pointed out the king, was there any light? did you see an angel above the king? Is it true that the devil appeared to you? And did you see the devil in bodily form? And did the devil speak to you? Did the devil promise you anything?
Initially, Agnes denied any of the charges brought against her. But then came her time in the dungeons, where she was subjected to severe torture.
International human rights law has evolved to declare any use of torture a violation.
To leave the body, I will not feel. I detach myself from myself. I rest above and below, beside and between, but not within. I envision myself devoid of all emotion and motion. I am not even a vessel, so unmoved am I. I rest on the hill above and watch, unmarked. My flesh lies far below in the distance. It is neither hot nor cold. I witness the metal rod puncture the tongue. I feel nothing. I witness the metal rod stretch the face and penetrate it. The wind blows softly around me. I see the blow to the skull and observe blood seep through the dress that is mine, but no longer mine, and I am unmoved. I turn my head and see my daughter cry out as a sword slashes my throat. A sound escapes her that I've never heard before, and I feel nothing but the air whisper through the trees. A bird caws. The world revolves and an eagle flies above. I have left my body. I do not feel. I detach myself from myself. I do and do not exist.
In heaven, there will be no law. In hell, there is nothing but law. Due process, all the way down.
That was Justice, the first in 3 films that we're going to share with you this evening by Liz Lerman and her team. And then as a part of the format, we've invited a series of guest scholars from the University of Akron here. And I'm so excited to welcome our first one to join us in this discussion. This is Daniela Jauk, and she is an assistant professor for Sociology and Criminal Justice at the University of Akron. She received an MA in Sociology from the University of Graz in her home country, Austria. She started her career as a social worker in feminist contexts and served as independent women's representative of the City Council Graz. She completed her doctoral work in sociology as a Fulbright student here at the University of Akron, specializing in qualitative research methodologies and sociology of deviance and gender studies. Dr. Jauk is a certified clinical sociological practitioner with the American Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology and holds a certificate in active research methods from the University of Akron. Danny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was the most joyful gig of my academic year.
Oh, yay. Joy during COVID. I love it.
Yes. I'm glad you said we don't have to be experts, because let me start with the confession that I've never been exposed to dance art. This was the first dance art piece I consciously have inhaled, enjoyed, thought about, yeah?
Oh, I love that. Well, welcome to
Thanks.
dance too, then.
Yes, it is the start of something big. And
Oh, good, excellent.
I want to learn more.
Oh, good. So I'm so excited by that, but I also want to know, like, what did this film Justice, bring up to remind you from your own research and experience across criminal justice and gender studies? You didn't get to talk to Liz beforehand, so I'm really curious, though, like, what came to mind for you, because you have a different vantage point in this world?
A lot comes to mind, and I think this work is highly relevant for contemporary contexts. So I was familiar with feminist analysis of witch hunts as terror against women, yeah, in the framework of gender inequality. Mm-hmm. But this opportunity gave me the chance to look a little bit deeper into the work of Silvia Federici. Mm-hmm. Silvia Federici is an Italian-American radical autonomous feminist Marxist thinker, mm-hmm. Professor Emerita from Hofstra University, and she published a book 1998, The Caliban and the Witch, it's called, where she analyzes witch hunts from a feminist Marxist perspective. This is a highly fascinating work, and I can relate a lot of the content here from the video. Liz Lerman starts off by saying witches are knowledgeable, yeah? Mm-hmm. They know lotions and potions. So we see how women's knowledge is being seen as dangerous. Mm. They know lotions and potions for reproductive freedom. No? Mm. Witches are also women who know about how to prevent pregnancies, how to end pregnancies. Often they are midwives, so they are sisters in reproductive freedom for a large number of women. That's dangerous. And Federici argues that is particularly dangerous because capitalism arises in Europe. It's not a coincidence that witch hunts center in the UK, where also there is the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. She even talks about the geography of witch hunts, and the case of Agnes, Liz brings up, is a Scottish case, but we see in Scotland there is certain geographical territories who are affected, those that are closer to England. Mm. It's not a general movement. And Federici shows that witch hunts are really it is terror against women, but it is a very specific intervention of the church and the state in conjunction in the service of capitalism. Mm. We don't want women running wild under capitalist regime. We want women to breed workers. Mm. Witches are also seen as sexual women. So sexual, they commune with the devil even. They are sexually autonomous. These are women who are maybe dating men from other castes, classes, mm-hmm. upper classes. These are queer women. Mm. And there we see a control of the female body that is ongoing into today. On my way here, to make a connection, on my way here I was looking, Ohio, we are sitting in Ohio. Ohio is a state with 11 million people. Mm-hmm. We have 9 abortion clinics right now in the state of Ohio, of which only 6 perform surgical abortions. Mm. So we see reproductive freedom contested every day mm-hmm. in a Western industrialized, turbo-capitalist country. Yeah, mm-hmm. This is very relevant. And Liz Lerman brings up, there is human rights law, yes, that is outlawing torture. There is a law that is legalizing abortion, but still the capitalist patriarchal state finds ways to cut access for us, yeah?
Oh my goodness.
Very relevant.
All of this in a dance, right?
Right.
And this is why, dance doesn't always include words. And I appreciate how Liz weaves that through as a tool, just to hint enough that inspired so much just in the background of, you're like, oh, wait, what was that again? Let me research that up. And that, if anything, dance, I often find when people say, like, what's it about? About is such a finite idea. Like, it can only be about one topic or a series of topics. As opposed to, what if it's about processing the world, about processing the moment around women's reproductive rights and women's right to actually, have control over their own body. And I hadn't even gone to that point of how women's bodies are also, feeding and enabling capitalism. Mm-hmm. And so that an act against women's bodies is actually an act to preserve capitalism and the status quo.
And she even names it, and I find that really accurate, as an internal colonization. Witch hunts happen at the same time when Western settlers go out in the world and subjugate peoples and territories, extort, genocide. Yeah. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there is this internal colonization of females and female bodies, and the witch hunt as a pedagogical tool, because those women's bodies, as also we see in the video, are displayed. The mutilated and tortured bodies of witches are displayed for the public to see, to give them an example in this project of disciplining women and the general population into capitalist production systems. What I also found interesting, it is a criminalization of female solidarity. We see that in the video. King James gets nervous when 200 witches are supposedly conspiring against him. Yeah, and from Federici, I learned that the gossip as a term gets stigmatized during this witch hunt period. The gossip used to be just a female friend, somebody you exchange knowledge with. But during the witch hunt now, you don't want to be seen with other girlfriends, because you could be accused to be a witch. Yeah, you could be accused to be a gossip. Now it's negative. It's bare of any knowledge. It's just negative talk.
Wow. I mean, the roots of those things. I want to ask you one more question before we move on to the next film. I'm curious, with all of this that obviously sparked in your mind and the words, what of the imagery is standing out to you? If people were to watch this again, any moments that you'd want to uplift?
I was really uncomfortably touched by the garage scene and by other scenes, because they are so close. I feel like as a recipient, I have to watch so closely that struggle. And I was not sure in the garage, is this Agnes? It's this garage setting. She potentially could go out, but she cannot go out. Or is it Justice struggling? I mean, cramping on the floor. It made me very uncomfortable, but I also am challenged because I'm not being let off the hook. Yeah, I have to stick with that unsolved question that justice so often is completely unjust towards women and girls.
So great. I can't wait to watch the film again. Thank you so much, Dani, for joining us. So the next film up is Cosmos.
The sun is the focus. The planets move round like the shape of an egg. The sun is the focus, and the planets sweep away in the same area and time. The sun is the focus, and their movements are in relationship to their distance.
I had put my work aside while my mother was shackled to a cellar floor. They repeatedly asked Mother about such false magic as venomous toads and stray dogs. And what they should have asked is about the magic of the stars and planetary motion. They were not accustomed to having someone of my stature defend a witch. We won.
The sun is the focus. The planets move round like the shape of an egg. The sun is the focus, and the planets sweep away in the same area and time. The sun is the focus, and their movements are in relationship to their distance.
That was Cosmos, the second in our series of 3 films by Liz Lerman and her collaborators this evening. And to discuss this film, I'm really excited to bring another colleague from here at the University of Akron. This is Francisca Ugalde. Francisca was born in Chile and relocated via Colombia and Puerto Rico to Ohio in 1999, and currently lives in Merriman Valley, Akron. She graduated from Kent State University with her BFA in painting in 2005 and earned her MA in Arts Administration from the University of Akron. She currently works as a curator and instructor at the Institute for Human Science and Culture at the Drs. Nicholas and Dorothy Cummings Center for the History of Psychology. Francisca has been involved with numerous community organizations, including Big Love Akron and the Lock 3 Summer Arts Experience. Fran, welcome. Welcome to the dancing conversation.
It's exciting.
Yay. And I want to start to revisit one of my favorite things about the Cummings Center is it uses a lot of language about what it means to be human that I'm like, that's how we talk about dance. And so I think it already starts to address some of what Liz was criticizing about the organization of knowledge systems in higher education. And I'm really curious specifically with regard to Johannes Kepler as an astrologer and a mathematician and his mother being named a witch. What did you notice as someone else who sort of is at this juncture between sciences or even pseudosciences? I like to call them the soft sciences because they're a little less quantitative. Mm-hmm. But yeah, how were you processing what the cosmos was?
So my experience in training as a visual artist and as a curator really puts me in a position of taking something apart to understand how you put it together. Like what are the elements of any one thing you're put in front of. So interesting that my work at the Cummings Center sort of falls in the same, needs the same kind of approach to thinking of like how do we put all these themes together, all these topics that are kind of very broad. We are grateful to have our tagline of exploring what it means to be human, in which we can really put all these things together and mix them up and look at them from different angles, different perspectives that you're not necessarily used to putting together. So when I'm looking at this film, my first instinct is to really break it up into like a visual, like the elements of how it's put together, what's in front of me, and I look at the structure of the images, the visual elements, the lines, the spheres and circles, the movement of these elements, how they react with each other, the relationships to each other, the planes in which the viewer is coming from. You're at times looking up to the sky, to the cosmos and the stars, and then you will find yourself looking through the perspective of the view of a child, the eye level of a child, to then maybe looking down at the woman maybe floating in the space. It's uncertain what the space is supposed to be doing, but it fluctuates between up and down, flat and deep. And to me, it was really looking at how all those elements were telling a story without really knowing the story. I found myself just thinking of what are these relationships? And I found a few different relationships that really kind of came back and forth throughout the storytelling. The primary one that really stuck out was the relationship of mother and son. The theme of the story is really based on the story of Johannes Kepler and his mother. So it really put me to thinking, it took me to the one image that really kind of stands out in the film that is very different from the rest of the imagery, and it is of the woman looking at the child. And it immediately just kind of really isolated, this is a story about a particular relationship between mother and son. Completely outside of the witchcraft and anything else. It was kind of very, a little detail that was thrown in there. Another relationship that was very apparent was that she was speaking also, the voice of the woman spoke about the field of astrology and astronomy. So when she's repeating the words that are very minimal, the script is very minimal throughout the film, so it really stood out as it having some kind of, like having to pull meaning out of it. And when looking a little deeper into those words, those are actually completely allude to her son's, Johannes Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion, those specifically one by one, those lines. And so I thought it was interesting that she was the one speaking about astrology and astronomy. When the voices of the man comes up, it's really defending her. So it's sort of like switching roles. So that relationship of like mother, son, and how they like saw each other in relationship to the work they did.
There's something, the relationship that I also just want to acknowledge, something that stood out to me when I watch it is hearing the man, I assume as an adult, Kepler's perspective, saying that they're not used to a person or basically a man of my stature witnessing these witch trials or being in the room. Did you catch that too? Did that mean anything for you?
Yeah, I think that what made me think about was another relationship in the conversation is that the relationship of the feminine to the masculine. And that as a man in the sciences and mathematics, he comes from the realm of the official, the approved realms of knowledge, and it's compared to to witchcraft in terms of they're both alluding to this bigger picture, this bigger context of the cosmos where we come from. But the mathematics are official and approved versus the witchcraft, which is the feminine versus the masculine. So I think having him standing up for the femininity of his mother being in trial was like kind of giving a little credence to something that normally wasn't getting any. And a final relationship that I thought came through the various changes of the scenes of the images was the micro to the macro, specifically in how the background changed from looking at the space, in which it was very obviously looking at the stars, and then you see the woman sort of floating on from above on the ground, and it makes it seem like, is she floating, is she falling? But it's a flat space, so it's kind of really took it down to the human behavior, but it at the same time overlapped into this outside space and back and forth. So you weren't really sure what you were looking at, but it bounced between those two spaces, the large, the small, the woman, the feminine, the mother, the child. So to me, the whole film had that constant bouncing around of sort of opposites, but that are completely related in a really inherent way.
Interwoven in
Correct.
some ways, symbiotic possibly too. I just want to acknowledge to our friends who are tuning in and remind you that contrary to traditional dance performances that happen in real time and they happen once and then you can never revisit them again, after premiering, this conversation, including the films, will live on NCCAkron's YouTube channel. And you captured so much in your viewing and reading of the films that I want to go back and watch them over again, because I'm like, I don't know that I missed some of that as well. Thank you so much, Fran, for such a generous reading and all that you've pointed out as you broke it down and how you organized it. I'm ready for this. Is like post-game recap. All right, we should have gotten a board to diagram it out.
We can do that.
Okay, next time. Very good. I'm really excited to turn it up to our final film. And this will be Forgiveness. And then when we come back after the film, we'll welcome our third and final guest.
A spell for forgiveness. Sit with me before the jailkeeper comes. Tell me your fears. I am everywhere there is good company. I have music in my bag and a shawl to wrap and warm you. Verse 1. Forgiveness bends toward the earth, an arc of grace experienced in small, unrecognized acts all day long. It's out here on the edge of town, something caught in the corner of an eye, a suspicion, a dream you can't quite remember next morning, like a drink of cool water or the shine in a reflecting pool. No, more like your grandmother's cooking. A breeze, sudden and unexpected, maybe even silence. Verse 2, is there an amount you can forgive? Can you name or count all of the things you've forgiven? People you know, personally or just barely? Is it many or few? Forgiving some but not others? Forgiving a part but not the whole? An injustice or a crime or an act, or are they all the same thing? A reckoning. Verse 3. I soften and then allow for the possibility of something new between us. I ask myself to give up the withholding of love. I could be reborn, or prepare to be, as forgiving requires that we recreate one another. If I don't, I will be created by the unforgiven, penned in, forced to work from a distance, like magnets repelling. When I forgive, we embark to the uncertain, tender, and daily made. Verse 4. Everyone wants to be forgiven. Everyone wants to be free of their shame. Everyone wants to move unencumbered. But perhaps that is not forgiveness. I know, because I am forgiveness. A caution. Make sure you are ready, because you won't know yourself when I have finished with you. You will not recognize your imagination stripped bare of its suffering. You won't comprehend your body now that the weight of history is off your spine. You won't be able to perceive the new rhythm of your blood streaming out of a heart as innocent as the day you were born. The world is indeed made new. Sit with me before the jailkeeper comes.
That was Forgiveness, the third and final film in the series we're sharing tonight by Liz Lerman and her collaborators. And to discuss this aspect and continue to, don't forget, we also have our call to action, a little invitation that Liz left behind as well. And so we'll make sure to close out there. But before we do so, I'm excited to welcome friend and colleague, Dr. Heather Braun. Dr. Heather Braun is an associate professor of English at the University of Akron, where she teaches 19th and 20th century British literature, composition, literary theory, young adult literature, and career exploration. She has published on David Mamet, Mary Braddon, Augusta Webster, Sidney Owenson, Norman Mailer, Oscar Wilde, Carolyn Norton, Mary E. Coleridge, and the femme fatale in British literature. She has worked alongside young writers in Summit Lake through Akron's Reimagining the Civic Commons initiative to foster economically diverse neighborhoods, build civic pride, and advance environmental sustainability. She also moderates sessions for Reflection Point, a nonprofit that fosters inclusive workspaces through empathy and open discussion. Currently, Dr. Braun facilitates design thinking workshops at universities and organizations in Northeast Ohio. Heather, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yay. And you've participated in some of NCCAkron's dance club conversations, so you know, like, there isn't just one answer, and we're not looking for definitive statements on dance. But I'm really curious, what did you notice from watching these films?
I noticed how individuals were crossing thresholds into these new and open spaces and reclaiming power through forgiveness. And so I think that witches, like other kinds of misbehaving women, live in these kinds of ambiguous spaces. So what stood out to me the most in this piece was that kind of crossing of thresholds, and then that meant forgiving oneself, another person, but that it's a choice to kind of no longer live inside the prisons that we create for ourselves.
I love this idea of forgiveness is not an object that you can give, but it's an action, and it involves, choice, and it's not just also, giving to someone else, but also what you're embodying that for yourself. We've talked a little bit, I love all of the sort of heightened awareness around action, as we've been talking witchcraft, whether it's casting, conjuring, this idea of choice. So that might be the dancer in me that loves the action piece of it. I'm curious what you're noticing also about traditional female archetypes. What else this brought up for you in that front, both in literature, but let's face it, culture.
Yeah. Well, there are many, but if you had to sort of reduce them into four very broad ones, it's the maiden, the mother, the wild woman, and the wise woman. I am most intrigued by the wild woman because she is the default archetype for all the characters who don't fit anywhere else. So, witches, vampires, femme fatales, pretty much any kind of misbehaving woman you can think of. Characters as different from, as Uma Thurman's The Bride in Kill Bill, the Greek enchantress Circe, the manic pixie dream girl of John Green's novels. But in these cases, it's a figure whose independent thought and her kind of carefree behavior gives her a remarkable degree of power. So the best example I can think of this archetype that I've seen in a while, and it's a nod to Bewitched, but is the nosy neighbor of WandaVision, Agnes, who's played by the glorious Catherine Hahn. So, spoiler, Agnes is revealed to be Agatha Harkness, one of the original witches of the Salem witch trials. And just before her coven tries to kill her, she announces, "I did not break your rules. They simply bent to my power." And this line makes me think of Agatha. This makes me think of the verse in Forgiveness about forgiveness bending toward the earth, an arc of grace experienced in kind of small acts.
And WandaVision, I mean, this is not centuries year old. Liz, consciously was focusing not on present day witches, but you're talking about something that, we got no sponsorship rights here. Disney Plus streamed it out this year.
Yeah.
So these archetypes are alive and well. It's a way that how we talk about women, how we either categorize or find a way to give them power that somehow seems super normal relative to the average or those that conform some ways.
Yeah, and interestingly, Agatha is punished by being turned back into the conforming housewife that she chose to disguise herself. It's kind of an interesting ending.
Oh my goodness. So we've got the archetypes. I'm curious, in writing and working with language, are spells poems? I don't know that there is a spell class inside the English department, but I am sure that there are some poetry classes. And one can't help but think, certainly because of the rhyming, sometimes by what we see in popular culture, whether it was watching Charmed, in the 90s, and everything rhymed. And I never had put that together with the idea of poetry. Is that the more legitimate form of spells? But I'm curious kind of like what that brought up for you as a writer and an English professor.
So a poem that I teach whenever I get the chance, because I'm obsessed with this writer, is a poem called The Witch by Mary Coleridge. And I think this really does a great job of showing the intersections of archetypes, of female archetypes. So the title of the poem, The Witch, drives the narrative. And the narrator witch describes herself as innocent and passive, and she just wants shelter, and she asks to be lifted over the threshold and into the door. When that happens, of course, the fire goes out and lots of bad things happen. But what's interesting is Mary Coleridge was also the great-grandniece of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote Christabel, which is the first example of the literary female vampire.
We're getting into a little bit of lineage too, which
Right.
is what Liz alluded to.
And so in that case, this femme fatale, or this witch, is asking to be lifted over the threshold in some ways of the literary canon, to which she cannot be a part because she's writing under a pseudonym, and there's all kinds of complications. But I think that there's a very different kind of threshold in this poem than we see in Forgiveness. By letting the witch through the door, the spell is cast and the kind of this flame sinks and dies in the fire. But with this, we've got these refreshing revisions of the witch archetype and other female archetypes where crossing boundaries leads to something positive and freeing. And kind of defining of one's identity.
Forgiveness, a threshold, a crossing of boundaries, and an invitation to perhaps play with that a little bit too. So Heather, I'm so grateful to have tremendous colleagues and friends like you and Danny and Fran. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Christy.
And I can't wait to share, we have a call, something that Liz has made available. We've collaborated also with a local visual artist, Joan Colbert. And Joan has a series of artwork that we have made into postcards that you can go to NCCAkron.org for a full listing of locations around Akron to be able to claim those. And on it, there is a prompt to offer your own spell as a writing practice, an opportunity. And then it is postage paid and self-addressed, and it will be sent to Liz Lerman as a part of her ongoing research between now and September 1st, 2021. Here we have the quote and prompt that Liz had offered, and that was, "I have found the form of writing spells more like a calling or a listening. Every time I sit to write one, ideas and stories emerge. Keep the sentences or fragments short, that leads to momentum. All thoughts and ideas are welcome." So I hope that you'll check one of those out or make your own postcard. We'll also have that information available on our website if you can't get to one of the locations here in Akron. Would be remiss not to acknowledge all that make it possible for this evening's event. And I'd like to offer specific thank yous for our support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the GAR Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, and the Ohio Arts Council as far as our satellite residencies and dancing conversation programming is concerned. Some upcoming events. Those that are big fans of Liz Lerman, you want to be on the lookout for a new book coming out by her in spring of 2022. Critique is Creative. This sounds like a really great follow-up to Hiking the Horizontal, and of course the critical response process. And then here at NCC Akron, mark your calendars for our next dancing conversation, looking at Black male choreographers and uplifting them to tell their own stories on Thursday, June 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that will be via NCC Akron's YouTube channel. And then we also will have a premiere next month from our community commissioning residency artist, Kara Hagen, Reframe, Remnant, and Ritual. This film premiere will take place on Saturday, June 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern, also via NCC Akron's YouTube channel. Until then, dance on.